If I'm now going to be putting my software into a cloud environment, which by definition is shared with other people, doesn't that mean that there is potentially a weak link in the chain of some other companies putting in software that has risks built into it? And how can I mitigate that risk?
With the emergence of cloud computing, and there's a lot of hype around cloud computing, but there's some substance to it as well. And the big substance to cloud computing is the economic benefits that it brings to the table. And so, of course, the big benefit to cloud computing is dramatically reducing your cost of IT infrastructure. And we're not just talking about the cost of the hardware, but we're also talking about the cost of ongoing administration of your IT assets. And so by outsourcing that to various cloud vendors now out there, and by the cloud vendors' ability, to your point, to share resources, cloud vendors can now, in an economically feasible way, offer those services whilst at the same time taking the overhead of IT administration away from the CIO to the extent that they can. Now, having said that, I think we're a long ways away from a big enterprise contemplating offloading their mission-critical software assets to a cloud vendor. What we're observing is big enterprises are slowly starting with taking the low-hanging fruit, sort of the low-impact applications and moving into the cloud side, and experimenting with how that experience goes, both from a risk and security standpoint, but also from an operating cost standpoint, and start doing some diffs between how that's working out for them versus having them completely in their own control. But as that trend increases, and we're certainly looking at that trend and thinking it makes sense. As that trend increases, as you pointed out, the risk and security of the software becomes even more important. Why? Because now the control of the software is let go from your site, from your enterprise to somebody else's site. And of course that comes inherent with a variety of issues, one of which you mentioned, which is part and parcel to cloud computing is shared services. And that shared services puts your software at risk of being adjacent to another piece of software potentially coming from some other vendor that although you've done all the great work in ensuring that your asset is secure, if the other asset isn't secure, and by virtue of you sharing the same services, whether it be a relational database or a network segment, you're putting your own software at risk as well. So, we obviously have offered and launched a couple of cloud-based services to make your software what we call cloud ready. And by cloud readiness, we mean, first of all, do you have transparent insight into the security vulnerabilities and the risk of your software before offloading it to your cloud vendor? And then the second is, are you taking any steps to harden and to sort of protect your software assets while they're running in production, and especially while they're running in production in cloud vendor side, which is outside your own control. There's certainly a lot of activities that companies like ourselves or software security companies can do through the cloud vendor channels in offering solutions through them to their end users. So before the cloud vendors even accept a piece of software artifact, they can go through the appropriate assurance levels of that software to ensure that that software is free of vulnerabilities. There's a big amount of emphasis right now on cloud vendors around wire security, network security, around strong identity management, and of course, the next layer, the next sort of natural extension to that is going to be the application of the software layer.
If I was the CIO, what are the three things that you would suggest that I really focus on in terms of my organization getting to grips with software security assurance?
At a very high level, it's very simple. Like anything else that you want to get under control, there's really two main activities. One is, do I have a baseline of what I'm trying to deal with? Because if you don't get your arms around, if you can't quantify what you're trying to solve, there's no point in solving it. So the first thing I would do is I would look around and I would baseline and inventory all the software assets that are mission critical, that are important to me, that I care about. And inherent in that, of course, is attaching a risk profile of that software as well. I have, for example, 880 software assets under my management, of which 720 of them have a high impact to my business. The other 100 change are things that automate some internal part of the processes, but if they get hacked or breached, the impact is not as monumental as the other one. So the first thing I would do is categorize, inventory and sort of profile the software that is under your control from a risk standpoint. Then what you want to do as a second activity is you want to start a contextually accurate risk score for that software. So you can then say, today we're standing at a certain risk score for that software. And the only reason I say contextually accurate is because software vendors like ours can only bring so much automation to the table to calculate and quantify that risk score. It's really incumbent upon the IT enterprise to sort of sprinkle that algorithm with their own industry. Every industry has intricacies around how they score the risk. Obviously a financial services company won't score the risk the same way as an e-tailer or an ISV would. So once you have a good idea of what your baseline score for that software is, what then you can do is trend that over time and see, if you introduce appropriate solutions into the picture, is that trend improving or not? So, that would be a very high level sort of two-step activity that I would take if I were a CIO at my level.